Namaskar, good evening. The Commonwealth Games to be held in Victoria 2026 or that were to be held in Victoria in the year 2026 are now in doubt, as the state of Victoria in Australia has unilaterally pulled out of hosting the Commonwealth Games 2026. Now, the Commonwealth Games Federation, CGF, in an announcement said that, well, they were obviously disappointed with the decision, but that they are committed to finding a new host. Now, the reasons that have been put forth by the state of Victoria in Australia are primarily to do with cost concerns. So, in this presentation, we will take a look at what those cost concerns are, whether those are indeed justified, and what indeed is the larger issue at play here. Why is it that nations now are backtracking when it comes to hosting events such as Commonwealth Games, all these multi-sport events or multi-discipline events that we think of? Once again, welcome to StudyIQ IAS English. My name is Bhuvan Apurva, and before I take you forward in this presentation, very quickly, let me inform you that, well, you can go ahead and join me on my official Telegram channel here. Scan the barcode and it will take you straight to my Telegram channel. And before we begin this short session, as always, we do have a certain outcome-based learning that we always like to focus on. So here is the question for the day. All right, give it a go, guys. So the question that I have for you: all members of the Commonwealth are former colonies of Great Britain, and Commonwealth Games is a quadrennial sporting event. Which of the above statements are correct? Very quickly, just let me know in the chat, or if you leave me the answer in the comment box, well, we will be in fact taking this forward. I will be announcing your name in the 9 p.m. session tomorrow. So once again, I would implore you, I would exhort all of you who are watching me live or those who will be watching this over the course of the next few hours or days, go ahead and quickly write the answer for this in the comment box, and the correct answers will be featured tomorrow's session at 9 p.m. All right. So let's go forward. Well, this is the Prelims to Interview initiative that is beginning on the 22nd of July, the one-year comprehensive course for any serious civil service aspirant. I would again request all of you to go through the whole course brochure on studyiq.com. It's being offered in 3 languages, English, Hindi and bilingual. And so go ahead, take a look at the course brochure and sign up for this ASAP. Admissions closing on the 22nd of July. Use the code BALIVE, as that assures you a substantial discount. All right. So in the topic for the day now, so what we do find today is that earlier today, the Premier of Victoria in Australia, all right, Dan Andrews, so he goes ahead and makes a major announcement that the state of Victoria is now unilaterally pulling out of this agreement with the Commonwealth Games Federation to hold the Commonwealth Games for the year 2026 that were to be held in Victoria, Australia. Good evening, Sai Krishna. How are you? Most welcome. Right? So what you find is that, well, this obviously set ripples across the world, not just in Australia, where the Commonwealth Games Federation reacted sharply, but then across the whole world. And a larger debate straight away came forward as to whether Commonwealth Games do indeed serve any purpose. And then the larger question as to what is the purpose, what is the takeaway for these host nations that host these kind of massive multidisciplinary events. What's in it for them? Right? Good evening, Monica. Welcome. Welcome. So have a look at it. And he says that the reason for this is that more than $6 billion for a 12-day sporting event is just too high. This is the reason, the cost concern being laid out by the Premier of Victoria in Australia. He says it's too costly, and he says it's more than twice the estimated economic benefit the Games would bring to the state. Now, obviously, this has been met with varied response across political aisles in Australia, but then we need to focus on the issue that is being raised by the Premier here. That indeed, cost overruns are a frequent part of most of these multidisciplinary events that happen across the whole world, from say Qatar to Brazil to in fact the highly famed, and we will discuss this in today's class, the Montreal Olympics, where in fact it took Canada close to 30 years, in fact the state of Montreal, the city of Montreal, it took them close to 30 years to pay off the debt of holding that Olympics there, the Summer Games in fact, right? So we'll take a look at that. Going forward, So first we need to understand why is the interest in such sort of games fading, And so first you understand here that the 2026 games was doomed from the very start. In fact, you had the whole timeline that was set in place by the Commonwealth Games Federation. They said that they wanted the host city to be finalized by 2019. However, that couldn't happen. And so what you find is that, well, most of the bidders who had come forward, they again backtracked. And that happened primarily again because of the cost factor, that it's just too costly to hold these events. That the influx of tourists is okay, but then the infrastructure that you go ahead and create is not long lasting, it's not sustainable for public use. That it is a one-time costly affair that has no viable benefits for the public at large. Right? So what you find is, well, that the state of Victoria then goes and volunteers, in fact, to hold the event in 2026, the Commonwealth Games, and then just 18 months after the decision is announced, backtracks because the estimated cost, as according to the Victoria state, has gone up by close to almost 300%. So when you go forward, well, these are the questions that they are asking. What is the rate or the return of investment? The money that you go ahead in creating the infrastructure, the capacity to hold such events, do you get back enough in return? That's the number one question being asked by these states. The number two question, straight away you find that, well, after Victoria backtracked and said, well, we are not going to host the Commonwealth Games in the year 2026, none of the Australian states, the other states, in fact, come forward and say, okay, we'll do it. No. In fact, each of them categorically say, no, it's beyond our remit. It's just too costly. Then, by the end of the day, you had the discussion shift to whether New Zealand could do it. And they also came out with a denial. And finally, just before we were to go live, we had the whole discussion in the Australian media playing out whether India should go ahead and host the Commonwealth Games 2026. So you see, it's like a hat, it's like a crown that no one wants to wear because it's a crown of thorns, right? So let's go forward and have a look at it. So the last year's Commonwealth Games. Now that indeed, again, this is not just in isolation, that 2026 is the only one that is compromised. What you find is last year's Commonwealth Games, where the Indian contingent did relatively exceedingly well, in fact. What you find is that, well, 2022 was also jinxed. You had Durban that was first chosen, then again stripped of those rights because of, again, financial irregularities that came into effect, that they were unable to finish the projects that they had committed. And at the last moment, to save the blushes of the Queen, you had Birmingham that finally came in with a massive investment from their side to host what is possibly the most successful Commonwealth Games till now. However, please realize that this is a common theme across most Commonwealth Games so far, that, well, the venue, the host city, is often undecided up till at least the last moment. Right? Let's go forward and have a look at this larger question now. Does the Commonwealth, this group of nations that were probably once had their allegiance to the crown, well, do they want these games? So what do you find? That in the last 20 years, only one time has the Commonwealth Game being held outside the United Kingdom or Australia. And that was in New Delhi in the year 2010. And again, originally expected to cost $270 million. Once again, cost overruns. The cost overruns leading it to 16 times higher than the estimate. So you realize that this is a common theme that comes with these sort of events. That the money that you say assume or you want to spend, eventually are going to spend up a lot more. Good evening, Pratik. Welcome. Welcome. Thanks for joining, all of you. Right? So now the reasons behind the lack of interest. Firstly, what do you find is, well, from the athlete's side, well, there is not a lot of interest from their side too. Most of the major athletes seem to give the Commonwealth Games a miss. In fact, not even including Usain Bolt himself, who once had categorically said, well, Commonwealth Games is not at the level of Olympics, and that's, I'm paraphrasing him, which was eventually denied by him that, well, it was misquoted, but then the larger sense is what we have to grasp here. that even the best of athletes don't want to perform in the Commonwealth Games. Now, this is the lack of interest from the side of the athletes. Now, let's understand the lack of interest from the side of the government too. That most of the countries are now not very keen to associate with Britain, including Australia and obviously India. That they would not rather involve in these games. That indeed it is a futile exercise where only a select nations participate. And so probably those records, those participation may not mean everything or anything at all. Right? So the part of that is again a growing indifference to the original purpose of the games. In fact, what was started as the Empire Games in the year 1930, the first year when Commonwealth Games were held. That Empire Games, the whole purpose was that, well, there should be friendly nations, that there should be unity among the realms of the crown, that all the colonies should be kept together. However, this was the aim in 1930. We are in close to 2030 now, and the ambitions of each of these nations and obviously the relevance of the crown and United Kingdom is on completely different levels, which is why a question could be asked as to whether these sort of games do deserve our participation. At the same time, what you do understand and go forward, and a very important point for us to really consider here is that, well, doing away with the Commonwealth Games is not as easy as it sounds, because there is a larger factor at play here. That Commonwealth Games is the only platform, mind you, the only platform where you find that the disabled athletes perform side by side with the non-disabled athletes. So now the doing away with the Commonwealth Games may deal a body blow to inclusion in sports, right? So this is again mentioned by Rowan Crothers, who is a prominent athlete from Australia, a disabled athlete who went on Twitter and said, well, the Commonwealth Games is the biggest major international competition that features athletes with a disability alongside able-bodied athletes, a great opportunity to raise awareness for sports, for disabled individuals, for inclusivity in sports, right? You also find that the sports of netball, well, the pinnacle of this sport is getting a medal in the Commonwealth Games. So again, if Commonwealth Games were to not be done or not to be held, these two are going to be directly affected. You are looking at adverse impacts, not just on, say, inclusivity in sports or inclusion in sports, but also that the sport of netball will be adversely affected, right? Going forward, so look at the cost here now. You often find that, well, there's a common theme now among, say, those nations that have, say, committed to being hosts of these multidisciplinary events in the past. So what do you find? Brazil, well, it hosted the Olympics in 2016 and the World Cup in 2014. China hosted the Olympics in 2008. India, the Commonwealth Games in 2010, and Russia, the Sochi Olympics, the Sochi Games, in fact. So what do you find? That, well, these nations are doing it for completely different reasons. That money is not a problem here. It is about showcasing your might, your relevance in the global order. Whereas for countries like, say, in Europe, in Australia, that may not be a priority anymore. Which is why you have, say, countries like even Qatar, which went ahead and overspent on holding the World Cup there. Because again, different priorities, different strokes for different fields. So once again, what you need to realize is that the priorities of these states are different, which is why Australia may be justified in pulling out of hosting the CWG 2026. All right. So now let's look at a major example here. So I told you, like, the cost benefit analysis needs to be done of hosting these multidisciplinary events. So the first example and the most obvious example that you as a student should be or must be or ought to be aware of is the Montreal Games. The 1976 Summer Montreal Olympics, well, they had a budget. The initial budget was of $125 million US. Arun Karan, good evening. Bulbul, good evening. Welcome all of you. So the budget for the Montreal Olympics was $125 million. By the end of the whole project, by the end of the whole conclusion, in fact, of the Olympics, what you find is that this has escalated to 1.5. In fact, it left the whole city of Montreal with a debt of more than $1.5 billion. Such was the magnitude of the debt, in fact, that it took Montreal close to 30 years just to pay off debt. Now, what does this mean? That this impeded their ability to, say, invest in social capital, say in health, in education, in the different community outreach services that could have been done with that money. So again, the cost-benefit analysis needs to be done. Was it worth for Montreal? In fact, such is the joke there that this particular stadium that you see here, which was called Big O, in fact, by the end of the 30-year period, this came to be known as the Big O because they owed money for building this particular stadium. So the 1976 Montreal Olympics is a very pertinent example for us to consider. Going forward, another example for your perusal that I have here is the 2004 Athens Olympics now. Now obviously, Greece's, say, slide into economic disarray, this debt crisis that we talk about when we talk about Greece, that's not exactly attributable to, say, their hosting of the Olympics in 2004. But then what you do see is that they overran their budget by 97% and they spent close to $11 billion on creating infrastructure, on creating services that now lie defunct, that are now not much of any use because again Greece does not have that sort of sporting hunger within their territorial boundaries. So does it again make sense for, say, countries to go ahead and spend such astronomical amounts on holding events for, say, a fortnight, and eventually it leaves them with nothing at all? Another example that you must be aware of is, say, the stadium that was built in the middle of Amazon in Brazil, which is now again not being used and in fact is under threat of being eaten up by the forest, encroached by the forest totally. Once again, for developing countries to invest such huge amounts, such huge sums in building these infrastructure that are not used on a frequent basis, does it make sense is a question a civil service aspirant should look to at least counter or at least encounter and come up with a solution to it, right? So what should be the way forward? What can you do then? So the way forward has to be provided. Number one, reform the bidding and selection process. That there is a lot of opacity, that there is a lot of opaqueness when it comes to, say, finalizing who is going to be the host. In fact, there are, say, particular instances where the Olympic committees or the national committees of particular countries have been held accountable for corruption, in fact, of giving bribes to secure the rights of hosting a particular event. Now, if this whole process is non-transparent, it muddies water right from the very start. So one, you need to have the bidding process that is open, fair and equitable. You're also looking at increasing transparency, not just in, say, awarding of contracts, but also the total cost outlay, the total, say, participation and, say, the money that is to be given by the IOC or the Commonwealth Games Federation, that needs to be also put in paper. You're also looking at promoting sustainable investments that serve the public interest. That there are cities, in fact, who have benefited out of, say, liaising with the Olympic Committee or the Commonwealth Games Federation in building infrastructure within their cities that are used till this date. The Los Angeles, in fact, 1984 example comes to mind, where they in fact turned a profit after the whole event was over, right? And you are also looking at co-hosting as probably a viable model, a viable strategy going forward. That it wouldn't be, say, pertinent or at least prudent to go ahead and give the whole responsibility of holding a particular event on a particular city or on a particular country, because again it's quite cost intensive. So maybe you could go ahead and have a region as a particular host or a group of nations as hosts, and then probably divide the particular cost that comes with it. In terms of Commonwealth Games Federation, another proposal that has been given is that, well, why not, say, take it back to London? After all, that's where it began from. Why not take it back there? That is a byproduct of, say, the British Empire, so they should have the ultimate responsibility of holding it. Let me know your thoughts below. Would you be open to, say, India hosting an event like this? Would you consider the return of investment as a factor, or would you only look at, say, it boosting India's profile in the global stage? For a developing country like India, would that be a prudent choice that we would make? Right? Go ahead and answer these questions for me. And before I wrap up this short session, well, once again, This is the question that I'm looking at for you to answer, and obviously I would appreciate any feedback relating to the questions that I have just asked you. Because again, this is a pertinent discussion that we must pay attention to. That sports, economics, and the health of a nation are intrinsically linked. And so as an aware aspirant for the UPSC examination, you would be best advised to analyze this and come up with solutions. Right? So once again, this is the question. All members of the Commonwealth are former colonies of Great Britain. Well, I'll give you a small hint here. Think of, say, Rwanda. Think of Togo. Well, they are part of Commonwealth. Think for a moment, were they part of the Commonwealth ever? Were they part of the colonial structure ever? Right? And Commonwealth Games is a quadrennial sporting event. Which of the above are correct? Leave your answers for me in the comment box, and the correct answers will be featured tomorrow evening at 9 p.m. in this special program that comes to you every evening at 9 p.m. on StudyIQ IAS English. On that note, it's a wrap. Do make sure to go ahead and join me on my official Telegram channel. Scan this barcode. It goes by the name of Bhuvan StudyIQ. Thanks for watching, everyone, whoever was joining me live, and those who will be watching this in due course. Till I see you with those who give me the correct answers, names tomorrow evening at 9 and tomorrow morning for the daily news analysis, the editorial edge. This is Bhuvan Apurva Jha signing off from here at StudyIQ. Thanks for watching. Good night. Jai Hind.